Just organize myself. Yes. Okay, you can call the case.
David March, Joseph Walsh, Thomas Gaffney.
Okay, I see all three defendants. You can be seated. On bond, present in court. Can all of the parties please put their names on the record?
Good morning, Your Honor. Patricia Brown Holmes, Special Prosecutor, along with Ron Safer, S-A-F-E-R, Brian Watson, W-A-T-S-O-N, Kelly Warner, W-A-R-N-E-R, and Aaron Gasparka, E-R-I-N-G-A-S-P-A-R-K-A. Ready for trial. Thank you.
Morning, Judge James McKay, on behalf of David March.
Judge Todd Pierre and Tom Breen, Bob Snelling on behalf of Joe Walsh.
Good morning, Judge. My name is Will Clayton. Nice to meet you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. So we left off yesterday in the state's case. Are we ready to start? Are there any issues that we need to address before we start the trial? Mr. Topic?
I understand that the subpoena to Mr. Calvin has been withdrawn.
We need to talk about that.
Thanks, Judge.
I'm sorry, one second. Can you put your name on the record, please?
Topic, T-O-P-S.
Thank you. Thank you.
Your Honor, this morning I actually met with Mr. Topic and I followed up with a text message and I advised him that I am withdrawing myself, even if, one of the Torahs or both of the Torahs is specified. And further, I would have no objection to Mr. Calvin being president of the court because I am withdrawing myself.
Okay, so he wouldn't fall under the motion to exclude then?
Yes.
Okay, so your subpoena is withdrawn. He's no longer a potential witness, so he can be present for the trial. In addition, I asked the court reporter not to tender the transcript from yesterday until I could give you admonishments not to give the transcript to Mr. Calvin, but since that's no longer an issue, that's a moot point, so you can get the transcript.
Very good.
Okay, any other issues before we start back with the trial? State?
For me.
Defense? Okay, great. We left off yesterday in the state's case. State, call your next witness.
Yes, Judge, we would call Sergeant. Oh, we have stipulations, Judge.
Okay. Can you just put your name on the record again?
Morning, Your
Thank
Honor.
you.
Brian Watson to the state. The people of the state of Illinois, Thomas Gaffney and David March, have reached several stipulations. Thank you, sir.
You may proceed.
With the court's permission, may I approach?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Do you have a copy for the court reporter? And if not, you can provide one at some point today.
Copy to the court.
Thank you.
A number of the exhibits identified on the stipulation were admitted yesterday. With the court's permission, may I identify the exhibits the state now offers by stipulation rather than read the entire 3 sets of exhibits of stipulations that have been marked, filed, and signed?
Yes, and what I'm going to do then is if you can just identify them, read the portions that you want, but I'm going to direct the court reporter when she gets her copy to incorporate them into the record in their entirety.
The state offers People's Exhibit CPD TR1, Chicago Police Department Tactical Response Report, CPD-11377, Rev. 10 October 2007, by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD OBR1, Chicago Police Department Officer's Battery Report,
CPD 11.451 Rev January 2004 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit 813R Dash Cam 1 Chicago Police Department Dash Cam recording HX 475653 813R PC 0Z400 October 20, 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit 845R Dash Cam 1, which is the Police Chicago Department Dash Cam recording HX 475653 845R PC 0S571 October 20th, 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit 823R Dash Cam 1 Chicago Police Department Dash Cam recording HX 475653 823R PC 02846 October 20th, 2014 in evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit March Training 1 Chicago Police Department Employee Training Record for David March into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit Walsh Training 1 Chicago Police Department Employee Training Record for Joseph Walsh into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit Gaffney Training 1, which is Chicago Police Department Employee Training Record for Thomas Gaffney into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 1, Chicago Police Department General Order G030201, the use of force model effective 16 May 2012 to 16 October 2017 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 2, Chicago Police Department General Order G0302, use of force guidelines effective 01 October 2002 to 16 October 2017 in evidence by stipulation. The state offers Exhibit CPD Order 3, Chicago Police Department General Order G0301, Communication Systems and Devices, effective 30 May 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 4, Chicago Police Department Special Order S030201, firearm discharge in incidents other than the destruction of animals, effective 01 October 2002 to 30 October 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 5, Chicago Police Department General Order G030205, incidents requiring the completion of a tactical response report, effective 1 October 2002 to 30 October 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 6, Chicago Police Department Special Order S030203, incidents requiring the completion of a tactical response report, effective 01 October 2002 to 30 October 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 7, Chicago Police Department Special Order S030204, Clear Automated Tactical Response Report, effective 13 April 2004 to 30 October 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 8, Chicago Police Department General Order G0401 for preliminary investigations, effective 08 September 2004 to 13 October 2015 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 9, Chicago Police Department Special Order S0402, Crime Scene Protection and Processing, effective 15 June 2002 to 06 November 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 10, Chicago Police Department Special Order S041301, Officers Battery Reporting Procedures, effective 28 December 2012 to 30 October 2014 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 12, Chicago Police Department General Order G0901, Access to Computerized Data, Dissemination and Retention of Computer Data, effective 03 February 2012 to present. In addition, Your Honor, it is not identified on the written stipulation, but counsel for the defense and the state have conferred. The state also offers People's Exhibit CPD Order 13, Chicago Police Department General Order G030202, Force Options, effective 16 May 2012 to 16 October 2017 into evidence by stipulation. Leaving from the Chicago Police Department stipulations to a separate set of stipulations in paragraph 2, the state offers People's Exhibit City Code 1, Municipal Code of Chicago, Chapter 2-84, Department of Police into evidence by stipulation. And in that People's Exhibit City Code 1, we direct the court's attention to Section 2-84-030, Police Board Powers and Duties, which states the board shall exercise the following powers: to adopt rules and regulations for the governance of the police department of the city, and Section 2-84-220, General Duties, which states the members of the police force of the city, when on duty, shall devote their time and attention to the discharge of the duties of their stations according to the laws of the state and ordinance of the city and rules and regulations of the department, to preserve order, peace, and quiet, and enforce the laws and ordinance throughout the city. The state also offers People's Exhibit GCFD, Video 1, Surveillance Video from the Greater Chicago Food Depository near 4100 block of West 40th Street, Chicago, Illinois, on October 20th, 2014, into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit GCFD, Video 2, Surveillance Video from the Greater Chicago Food Depository near 4100 block of West 40th Street, Chicago, Illinois, on October 20th, 2014, into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit Split Video 1, compilation video of People's Exhibit 813R-Cam 1, and People's Exhibit 845R-Cam 1 into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit Radio 1, audio recording of the Zone 6 radio channel for Chicago Police Department District Patrol use on October 20th, 2014, into evidence by stipulation. The state offers People's Exhibit Radio Transcript 1, a true and accurate partial transcript of People's Exhibit Radio 1 into evidence by stipulation. And for the court's attention, People's Exhibit Radio Transcript 1, the line numbers on the left column are designations for the line and not the time stamps for the recording.
Sorry, so the line numbers on the left are for the line?
And not time stamp.
Thank you. And that was for the radio 1 or the radio transcript?
Radio Transcript 1, Your Honor.
Thank you.
The state offers People's Exhibit Gaffney Grand Jury 1, a certified transcript of the testimony of Thomas Gaffney in grand jury investigation, grand jury number 14 GJ 970, July 1, 2015, 1:30 p.m. into evidence by stipulation and, as discussed before, offered against Thomas Gaffney alone.
That is correct, Judge. It was approved.
Thank you. I went ahead and wrote it on your stipulation as well.
Those are the exhibits the state now offers into evidence by stipulation.
So stipulating Mr. McKay?
Yes, Your Honor.
So stipulating Mr. Pugh or Mr. Green?
Yes, Your Honor.
And so stipulating Mr. Fahey?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, those stipulations are received and remitted.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Are you asking that those items obviously be entered into evidence as well?
We are asking those to be entered into evidence at this time as well.
Okay, and any objection to that, Mr. McKay?
No.
Mr. Pugh or Mr. Green?
No, Your Honor.
Mr. Fahey?
No, Your Honor.
All of those exhibits that are listed in your written stipulation, the identification marks are stricken and they are admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay? Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state would call Sergeant Snelling.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes, I do.
With the court's permission, may I provide the witness with a notebook full of exhibits for his examination.
Yes. Because yesterday the defense said if they had an objection to that, they would let you know.
The defense has been provided with the same.
Okay, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Would you state your name and spell your name for the record?
Sergeant Larry Snelling. Last name is Snelling. Star number 919.
How are you employed?
I'm employed by the Chicago Police Department.
And what is your rank?
Rank of sergeant.
How long have you worked with the Chicago Police Department?
I'm 1 month shy of about 27 years.
When could you go through for the court your background with the Chicago Police Department?
I joined the Chicago Police Department 2 January 1992. From the academy, I was assigned to the 2nd District, the Wentworth District. I spent a year there. From there, I was transferred to the 7th District, Englewood. 1994, I worked the gang and tactical unit till about 1999. 99, I took a brief leave of absence from the job. I took a job with Telecommunications Incorporated, where I did dignitary protection and industrial security. 2001, I returned. At the end of 2001, I was detailed to the academy and eventually assigned to the physical skills unit.
What is the physical skills unit?
Physical skills unit is the a unit within our education and training division, where I was responsible for training control tactics, defensive tactics, physical fitness, use of force guidelines, things of that nature.
And you taught that at the academy?
Yes.
Is use of force both talk to recruits and also talk to officers who have been with the force for some time?
Yes.
Could you just continue describing your background at the Chicago Police Force?
So I was assigned to the academy at that time from, actually I was assigned in 2002 until 2010 when I was promoted. 2010, I was then assigned to the 22nd District. I spent a brief period of time out there. I was then called upon and asked to lead up the training for the NATO event. So myself and some other sergeants and lieutenants were responsible for the field force operations team, and I was also responsible for the strike teams that were out on 22nd Street.
What was the NATO event, and what were the field force operations?
Well, the field force operations team was a disciplined group of officers to deal with crowd control. So that's what we were doing. We were preparing for civil unrest in the city.
And what was the strike force that you led?
Well, the strike team. The strike team was a field force platoon. We were the first team to go in on 22nd Street when we were faced with the civil unrest.
And after the NATO event, what did you do?
After the NATO event, the department did a mass hiring. I was asked to return to the academy and be the supervisor sergeant over recruit training.
And in overall training, is that right?
Yes.
And did that include use of force?
Yes, it did.
What type of training is there regarding use of force, both for recruits and for experienced officers?
Well, for recruits, it's ground level training. So there's classroom training. There's also training that use of force training that's infused into their day-to-day activities as they go throughout their 6-month training period. For officers in the field, usually it's e-learning or maybe some in-service training.
And does that training include training in report writing involving the use of force?
Yes.
What forms are used in the Chicago Police Department that involve the use of force by an officer?
Well, on the ground level training for recruits, case reporting, number one, improper documentation of use of force through case reporting, and then the tactical response report. And the tactical response report helps the officer document the subject's actions and the officer's response.
And you have both given and received training regarding those reports.
Yes, that's correct.
Sergeant, the first area I'd like to explore with you is the process of documenting incidents where a police officer uses force. You just described some of those reports. How are you familiar with the process of documenting incidents where a police officer uses force?
Well, one, teaching, and two, I've actually approved tactical response reports myself.
And are there general orders that describe who should complete tactical response reports and how they should complete them when a police officer uses force?
Yes.
Showing you what has been admitted into evidence as CPD Order 5, and which is behind tab 1 on your book. Are you familiar with People's Exhibit CPD Order 5?
Yes, I am.
What is that?
That's the department's general order on incidents requiring the completion of a tactical response report.
What is the purpose of the tactical response report?
The purpose of the tactical response report is to accurately document the officer's response to a subject's action.
And whose observation does an officer use in completing a tactical response report?
Well, the involved member, that would be the officer who uses force.
And do those officers use the observation of other people on the scene, or is it limited to their own observations?
Well, when the officer completes the tactical response report, the officer should be documenting what he observes and how he or she responded to that officer's action.
Is there any ambiguity about that?
No.
Now, is in addition to the officers who use force, if an officer is battered or assaulted, should they complete a tactical response report?
Yes.
Why?
Well, if an officer is battered or assaulted, then eventually that officer will have to do the OBR, which is the officer battery report. And in order to get to the officer battery report, you have to complete the tactical response report. Tactical response report will also give the officer the opportunity to explain the subject's action.
If we could turn to tab 2 in your book, which is People's Exhibit CPD TRR1, which has been admitted into evidence. What is that?
That's an actual copy of the original tactical response report.
And that is the tactical response report that was in effect back in 2014.
That's correct.
Now, what are the categories on the, well, first, let's focus on the far left, where it says on the far left-hand side of the form, where it says reason for use of force. Do you see that?
Yes.
And focusing on subject's action. Who is the subject?
Well, the subject is the person that the officer comes in contact with, the person to be arrested or the person that the officer used force to control.
And what are the categories on form People Exhibit CPD TRR1 for a subject's action?
Well, starting from the lowest level to the highest, from left to right, you have a passive resistor, an active resistor, an assailant based on an assault. You have an assailant based on a battery, physical contact, and you have the assailant deadly force.
Now, are those terms also used in use of force general orders?
Yes.
If we look at tab 3, behind which is People's Exhibit CPD Order 2, which has been admitted into evidence, what is that?
That's our general order on the use of force guidelines.
Now, it starts under Roman numeral 2 with a recitation of the relevant statute. Is that right?
That's correct.
And then it goes on to the department's policy.
Yes, it does.
And without going into all of it, is the policy essentially captured by the concept under C, 3C, where the general order recites the Supreme Court's holding in Graham versus Connor, that the central inquiry in every use of force is whether the amount of force used by the officer was objectively reasonable in light of the particular circumstances faced by that officer.
That's correct.
Now, does the department provide guidance to the officers about what use of force is reasonable given the subject's conduct?
Yes.
Looking behind page 4, tab 4, which is People's Exhibit CPD Order 1, what is, and that has been admitted into evidence, what is that?
That's the department's general order on the use of force model.
Looking at the second page, can you describe what that is for the court?
Yes, that is the department's use of force model. It's kind of a quick reference guide for officers to determine the subject's actions and officers' effective response.
And before we go through them, the terms resistor, assailant, cooperative subject, that's also in the TRR as well. Is that right?
That's correct.
Could you explain the different kinds of conduct and, well, let me ask you, according to the general orders, do these categories have any relation to the concept of reasonable force?
Yes.
And could you explain that to the court, please?
So basically, if you look at the model, your top left side, this describes the subject that the officer would come in contact with. And the officer can categorize them based on each title that you see there to the left. So this would be based on the subject's actions. So at the lowest level, we have a cooperative subject, 2 levels of cooperative subject. You have a subject when the police arrive, they automatically comply just based on the officer's presence. The next level is that subject who needs an officer to give verbal direction, and he's compliant with that verbal direction. So basically in those 2 situations, the only thing the officer needs is the officer's presence and verbal direction, and that can be used in conjunction with an arrest for a cooperative subject. If you look up to the next one, we have a resistor. And that resistor, there are 2 levels, passive resistance. This is usually someone you would see a protest or something of that nature, passive resistance, non-movement in response to verbal direction. They're not moving. They're not trying to escape. They're just not listening or complying with the officer's verbal direction. Now, if you look at the bottom right, you'll see that everything on the bottom is color-coded just like everything is to the top left. Everything that you see at the bottom right would be the appropriate or the reasonable officer's response to the actions of the subject that they've identified. So if you see the passive resistant, if you look at holding, pain compliance techniques, neuromuscular techniques, OC spray in very limited situations, the officer would be, those would be reasonable responses to that subject's action. Now, if you look up one higher, you have an active resistor. All right, that would be movement to avoid physical control. This is a situation where an officer is attempting to take someone into custody or to stop that subject to take them into custody, and the subject uses flight, moves away, pulls away, flares the arms, or even muscle tension to defeat the arrest. Hiding is another form of active resistance. For active resistance, if you look at the color coding, stunning, diffuse pressure strikes, which is an open hand or palm strike, it can be used to discombobulate the subject, throw them off balance, so that the officer can establish control. Also, OC spray or even a taser in some situations where we have active resistance. Now, if you go up a level, you're in the assailant category. At the lowest level, actions are offensively aggressive without weapons. Now, this person is an assailant. They're not actually striking the officer or attempting to strike the officer. They're displaying body language that the officer recognizes as pre-attack indicators. So someone who's clenching the fist, moving toward the officer, inching toward the officer, not listening to verbal direction as he's moving toward the officer, belated stance, a fighting posture, leading the officer to believe that an attack against him is imminent. And then we have actions will likely cause physical injury. So now we have a person who's actually attacking the officer, someone who's attempting to tackle him, punch the officer, kick the officer. And both of these are people without weapons. So if you look at the appropriate response there or the reasonable response, direct mechanical strikes. So we're talking about impact weapons, impact munitions, which would be your baton. Obviously, punches, kicks, knee strikes, elbow strikes, things that are taught in the academy. The taser, OC spray, those are all effective uses of force. Now, when you get up to the highest level, actions are likely to cause death or great bodily harm. This is an assailant deadly force. The officer's response there is the officer's firearm and other means of deadly force in response to that subject's action.
And can you describe what the subject's actions are in that area?
So the subject who's armed with a deadly weapon or utilizing deadly techniques. So it could be a subject who's armed with a handgun, a knife, or a blunt object and is attacking the officer or attempting to attack the officer. Or deadly techniques where someone attempts to put a chokehold on an officer or is pummeling an officer to a point where he or she is about to lose consciousness.
under the general orders involving use of force and the training given to officers about use of force, is use of deadly force appropriate against an assailant who is use of force appropriate only, I'm sorry, let me start that one more time. Under the general orders involving use of force and the training that's involved in use of force, is use of deadly force by an officer appropriate only against an assailant who is likely to cause death or serious physical injury to another person?
Yes.
And now, Sergeant, I would like to move, oh, I'm sorry, there is one more general order I'd like to discuss, and that is behind tab 5 of your book, which is People Exhibit CPD Order 13. And that has been admitted into evidence. Are you familiar with that order?
Yes.
What is that?
It's the Department's General Order on Force Options.
And is that sort of a narrative version of the use of force chart that we just looked at?
Yes.
And if we can look at that again on page 1, you see that the level of force response option guidelines depend upon the subject's actions. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you first have the cooperative subject as you outlined.
Yes.
And then the resistor, is that right?
That's correct.
And still on page 1 is you have the passive resistor.
Yes.
And then page 2 is the active resistor. And could you describe for the court what this general order says an active resistor is?
Just reading it, a person whose actions attempt to create distance between the person and the member's reach with the intent to avoid physical control and or defeat the arrest. This type of resistance includes gestures ranging from evasive movement of the arm through flailing arms and to full flight running.
And it then lists the use of options of force, including the use of the taser. Is that right?
That's correct.
Then if we turn to page 4 of that exhibit, which is CPD Order 13, it turns to assailant. You see that?
Yes.
And the first is actions are aggressively offensive without weapons. And what is that described as here?
I'm sorry?
What is it? The actions are offensively aggressive, are aggressive, offensive without weapons.
And just reading it, that this type of assailant is one who places a member in fear of a battery and includes advancing on the member in a threatening manner or closing the distance between the assailant and the member, thereby reducing the member's reaction time.
Okay. And then under 2, actions will likely cause physical injury. Could you describe that?
So then included in this category of assailant may be a subject who is, who is armed with a deadly weapon, and the subject fails to disarm, thereby making the subject's actions likely to cause physical injury.
Is that person, is deadly force authorized by these general orders against that person?
Not based on the general order, no.
And then what is 3?
Actions will likely cause death or serious physical injury. An assailant in this category is one whose actions will likely cause death or serious physical injury to another person, in addition to the response options and items. And I don't need to go any further.
Okay, but that's the only category where deadly force is authorized. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, Sergeant, I'd like to move from our discussion of the general orders and trainings to the application of those to the circumstances in this case. You have reviewed the dash cam video from car 813R, that is People's Exhibit 813R dash. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you've also reviewed the audio tape and transcript of the relevant radio calls on the evening of October 20th, 2014. That is People's Exhibits Radio 1 and Radio Transcript. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you have been told that Laquan McDonald was repeatedly told to drop his knife and that he did not drop his knife. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, to set the scene, the video from 813R does not show the episode between Mr. McDonald and the car that Officer Gaffney drove, does it?
That's correct.
And it shows one perspective of what had happened on Pulaski Road. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
With the court's permission, Your Honor, I would propose to play People's Exhibit 813R there.
I just have to have you back up for 1 second because I'm obviously taking notes. You went just a little bit fast. So you said it did not include dash cam from which car?
It did not show the episode between Mr. McDonald and the car driven by Officer Gaffney.
Thank you. So you're asking to publish what?
People's Exhibit 813R dash.
Any objection, Mr. McKay?
No.
Mr. Pugh or Mr. Breen?
Oh, Your Honor.
Mr. Fahey?
No, Your Honor.
All right, you may publish.
Thank you, Your Honor. Are we now on Pulaski, Sergeant?
Yes.
Sergeant, based on what you saw in that video, what you heard on the dispatch recording, as well as your knowledge of the general orders and training about TRRs, what is your opinion about who should have completed a TRR?
The officer who used force.
And why is that?
Well, because from what I can see in the video, obviously it's limited, but what I can see in the video is it appears that there's one officer who discharged his weapon.
And looking at People's Exhibit, well, let me give you a larger version of People's Exhibit Exhibit CPD TRR1. Yeah, I'm making this
So just for the record, that's a blow up of
People's Exhibit CPD TRR1.
thank you.
Sorry. Do you recognize that, Sergeant Snow?
Yes, I do.
And is that simply a blow-up of the TRR forms,
Yes, it is.
the blank that was available in 2014?
Yes.
Based on the video you reviewed, as well as your knowledge of the general orders and training about TRRs, how would you have identified Laquan McDonald?
Well, simply based on the video, I would have identified him as an armed active resistor.
And how would you have completed that form to identify that?
Well, I would have started out by checking, did not follow verbal direction. Then checking active resistor, fled. In the other category, would have stated that he was armed with a deadly weapon.
Your Honor, made the sergeant completed as he would have on CPD TRR1.
You're asking me to be allowed to step down from the witness stand?
I am.
Yes.
Thank you.
And for the record, the witness is complying with your request.
Thank you. And for the record, Sergeant Snelling, you have checked the box on CPD TRR1 that says did not follow vertical direction. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then fled. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then you have written in other deadly weapon none.
Yes.
Now, with regard to the other sections, where in this form where there was always other with a dash, does that indicate where officers are able to provide narrative descriptions?
Yes.
And are narrative descriptions also able to be provided in box 40 additional information?
Yes.
Thank you. Is there anything else that should have been checked or written in the subject's action part of that?
Based on what I see in the video alone, no.
Why, in your opinion, would a reasonable officer not have checked anything in the assailant assault box?
Because from this one video, the only thing that you see, or the only thing that I can see here, is the subject walking. The officers exit their vehicle, and it appears the subject is walking on an angle away from the officers, and at some point, the officer discharges his weapon. The subject spins and hits the ground.
How are the officers moving with regard to the subject?
It appears that the officer takes a step toward the subject.
Now, you are aware, Sergeant, that under Illinois law, a person commits a battery if he or she knowingly, without legal justification by any means, 1, causes bodily harm to an individual, or 2, makes physical contact of an insulting or provoking nature with an individual. Is that right?
Yes.
Is there anything, in your view, that could remotely be interpreted as Mr. McDonald committing a battery on this video?
No.
Now, why, in your opinion, would you have checked anything in the assailant deadly force category?
Because again, with the video that I'm looking at, and obviously it's a limited angle, but I don't see actions in furtherance of the subject walking with a knife.
Now, a knife is a dangerous weapon, isn't it?
Yes.
And you are assuming that Mr. McDonald was told to put down the knife and did not. Is that right?
Yes.
Well, why don't his actions continuing to walk with his knife in his hand make him an assailant?
Because a subject becomes an assailant, and again, we're looking at a video here. A subject becomes an assailant when that subject commits an act of furtherance other than just being armed. I mean, police officers come in contact with people who are armed all the time. There are 3 components you need for a deadly threat: the weapon system, delivery system, and intent. So when you look at this video, you see the weapon system, you see the delivery system, obviously. The question here would be the intent. If there was a movement in furtherance toward the officer that you could actually see in the video, then it would rise to the level of deadly force. But I can't see it in the video.
Now, with regard to delivery system and then that concept, are officers taught concepts regarding time distance and shield.
Yes.
And could you describe for the court what that is and what relevance that training has to to a subject who is armed with it?
Well, whenever it's feasible, timely, and it doesn't create a danger for the officer can utilize time.
Describe for the court what that is and what relevance that training has to to a subject who is armed with it.
Well, whenever it's feasible, timely, and it doesn't create a danger for the officer can utilize time, distance, and shielding. So if there's no immediate need to stop someone, the officer can utilize time to resolve the situation.
And how do they do that?
By keeping distance, or finding shielding if it's a possible deadly force situation, and utilizing time to de-escalate the situation.
With regard to shielding, what is that?
Shielding would pretty much anything that you could put, a protective barrier that you could put between yourself and the subject who poses a threat to the officer or anyone else on scene.
Could we back up a little bit, Jim, please, on 813R dash cam? So, and can we stop it now? So we've stopped it at the time when Officer Van Dyke is getting out of the car and driven by Defendant Walsh. What is the opportunity for shielding at that point?
Well, there's an opportunity if the officers choose to use shielding or step behind the vehicle. I mean, that's an option.
And they would do that by stepping behind the vehicle?
Well, they could do that by stepping behind the vehicle because that's the only way you're going to get some type of reasonable shielding between yourself and the subject.
And with a knife, could you describe the difference between the delivery system for a knife versus a gun?
Well, if this is a gun, obviously from wherever the subject is standing right here, you could carry out a deadly act immediately. And that would change this significantly. A knife, the subject actually has to close the distance in order to attack.
Now, and what is the concept of keeping a safe distance, and what is the opportunity for that at this point?
Well, officers always want to maintain some level of distance for a actionary gap. The officer has to have time to respond. As officers, we're normally slower than the subjects that we encounter because the subject is committing an action. And officers are responding, which makes it a reaction. And reaction is always slower than action. So the officer should maintain a safe distance and to keep the reactionary gap.
Okay, if we can run it for a few seconds. And then my question is going to be, do Officers Van Dyke and Defendant Walsh get further away or closer to the subject?
It appears they get a little closer.
Okay, when you say a little, Officer Walsh is on the line on the far left-hand side of the lane of the turning lane marked only. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And if we could roll it, he continues across that lane. Is that right?
Yes, he does.
Towards the subject, correct?
He gets closer to the subject, yes.
Okay. Thank you. Sergeant Stein, let's turn towards officer battery reports. Are you familiar with those?
Yes.
Is there a special order concerning officer battery reports?
Yes, sir.
If we look at the CPD order behind tab 8 in your notebook, which is People's Exhibit CPD Order 10, which has been admitted into evidence. What is that?
That's the department's general order on the officer battery reporting procedures.
And that was tab 8.
Oh, tab 8?
Yes. Tab 8, CPD Order 10.
1 second, Mr. Safer.
Yes.
Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller.
Would you like some water?
Yeah.
Oh, you may proceed.
Thank you. Are officers trained in the completion of officer battery reports?
Yes.
And are they trained in accordance with People's Exhibit CPD Order 10?
Yes.
Now, an officer battery report will be completed for all incidents when a sworn member is a victim of a murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, or assault while performing a police function either on duty or off duty. Is that right?
That's correct.
And what information does an officer use to complete this form?
The information that the officer has readily available from the subject's actions against the officer. And obviously the TRR report records the officer's response.
And is it based upon what the officer experienced or what the officer was told by others?
Well, it depends on the circumstances. As long as the officer is capable of completing the form himself and has not been injured to a degree where he can't, it's the officer's responsibility to fill out the form based on his or her information.
Looking at the form behind tab 9, which is CPD OBR 1 that has been admitted into evidence, is that the officer's battery report as it existed in 2014?
Yes.
Now, there is, do you see on the form where it says number of officers battered?
Yes, I do.
Now, there is no blank on this form for numbers of officers assaulted. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So how should this form have been completed if an officer were assaulted but not battered?
Well, if that is the form and the only box available at the time that the report was completed, obviously it would be believed that officer battered would cover assault. So one or two things could be done there. You could either put a number in there, and then from that point, if you decide to put 0 in there, then in the narrative you can explain that it was an assault.
And what if you put down 1? Would you also explain in the narrative that it was an assault?
Yes.
And where would you put that?
Well, the narrative would explain the subject's action. So when I'm when I'm writing the report, or the officer is writing the report, the officer should clearly explain what actions the subject took against the officer, creating either the battery or the assault.
And the second page of People's Exhibit CPD OBR 1 is an opportunity for the officer to provide that narrative. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And there are other places on the form. So, for example, under type of weapon threat, under H, where it says other specified, Is that a drop down or is that their space for the words to be typed in?
Words can be typed in.
Now, based on what you saw on the video, should a reasonable officer in Walsh's physical position have completed an officer battery report?
Just based on the video, and Officer Walsh didn't use any force that I could see in the video, the answer would be no. It wouldn't have been necessary.
Now, importantly, Sergeant, is assault subjective or objective?
It's objective.
What does that mean?
Well, everything that an officer does is based on the objectively reasonable standard, and that's what we train with our use of force.
Thank you, Sergeant.
So did you say it's subjective or objective?
Objective.
Thank you.
Brian, may I have one moment?
Certainly, take your time.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Cross, Mr. McKay?
Judge, I'll go last.
Oh, you are?
Can we go out of order?
Certainly.
Thanks, sir.
So that's Mr. Gaffney. All right, Mr. Fahey, you may
Thank you,
proceed.
Judge.
You're welcome. I take good notes. So.
Good afternoon, Sergeant.
How are you, sir?
Sergeant, do you have tab 7 in front of you?
Tab 7. Yes, I do.
And what is tab 7?
Tab 7 is people exhibit radio transcript 1.
And you reviewed, that's a transcript of the police radio calls that came in that night.
That's correct. Yes.
So you're aware in the review of the case that the incident actually started with a 911 call.
That's correct. Yes.
And the 911 call was of a citizen holding an offender at 41st and Kildare who was breaking into trucks.
That's correct. Yes.
And are you aware that the citizen turned out to be a gentleman by the name of Rudy Barillas?
Yes.
And are you aware that in addition to this offender breaking into trucks, that this person that we now know to be LaQuan McDonald actually used the knife and attacked Mr. Barillas?
Yes, I've read that. Yes.
So that was the first encounter that someone had that we know of that night with LaQuan McDonald. And you're aware that my client, Officer Gaffney and Officer McDelligett, were the police officers that responded to the 911 call.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask you some questions about what happened on 40th Street prior to the shooting incident on Pulaski, okay?
Sounds good.
In preparation for your testimony, did you also review the Greater Food Depository video?
Yes.
And that video shows Officers Gaffney and Officer McDelligett actually following LaQuan McDonald, correct?
Yes.
You don't see all of it. You don't see where they initially encountered them, and you can't really see how the encounter ends, but you do see them following them for some period of time, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Now, when those two police officers responded to that call, you're aware that they were dressed in police uniform, correct?
Yes.
They were blue shirts, unlike their white shirt,
Yes.
bulletproof vests, firearm at their side.
Full duty gear. Yes.
Okay. There is no mystery to anyone who would have seen them that they were Chicago police officers, correct?
I would say yes.
And they were in a marked police squad car.
Yes.
Now, and you're aware that after when they met with Rudy Barillas, the person we now know, Rudy Barillas, they had a brief conversation with him, and he points the direction that LaQuan McDonald had gone, correct?
That's correct.
And so those two officers, at that point, obviously, their focus is to see if they can find or apprehend the offender, correct?
Yes.
So it's reasonable that those officers wouldn't have had a lot of time to speak with Mr. Barillas at that point, correct?
I would say yes. If they have information over the radio and someone pointed in a direction and they saw the subject maybe matching a description, yes.
Okay. And are you aware from your review of this case that once they arrived at 40th Street, they turned their squad eastbound?
Yes.
And that would be going towards Pulaski.
That's correct.
And shortly after they arrived on 40th Street, they saw the person we now know to be LaQuan McDonald on 40th Street.
I guess I'd have to take your word for that one. I didn't see it in any video.
Okay.
So
That's not shown in the Greater Food Depository video, correct?
Not that I can see.
Okay. Are you aware from your review of this case that Officer McGilligan actually got out of the squad car after seeing LaQuan McDonald and got out on foot?
Yes.
Okay. And are you aware that when he first got out of the squad car, the first thing that he said to LaQuan McDonald was, "Show me your hands"?
I'm not aware that that's what he said, but I would imagine police training.
All right, and as you referenced police training, if an officer is responded to that call and he sees an individual with his hands in his pockets, it's police training that you would want to see that individual's hands, correct?
Yes, we train to always watch the hands.
And that's our safety of the police officer, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware that after he ordered them to show the hands, that LaQuan McDonald then opened a knife in his right hand?
No, I wasn't aware of it.
At that point, Officer McGilligan was about 20 feet away from him. So there was pretty good distance between him and LaQuan McDonald. Are you aware that at that point he was ordered to drop the knife on 40th Street just as they could do? Okay, and the video that you viewed that captures some of this interaction doesn't have any audio. When I say video, I'm referring to the Greater Food Depository video.
No, it doesn't.
Were you aware that Officer McGilligan ordered LaQuan McDonald to drop the knife several times while they were still on 40th Street?
I wasn't aware of it, no.
But you're aware that from the radio traffic, that shortly after this encounter, Officer Gaffney did get on the police radio and he requested additional police resources, correct?
Yes.
One of those resources was backup, additional car, correct?
That's correct.
Because if they're encountering someone who has a knife, is refusing to drop it, who's already committed a crime, that's a pretty dangerous situation for a police officer to be in, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And certainly a threatening situation when you encounter an armed offender who's refusing to drop the knife. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And are you aware that my client also called for a car with a taser?
Yes, I am.
And you're aware from the video, and the video actually depicts that Officer LaQuan McDonald then began walking eastbound towards Pulaski.
Yes.
And during this time that he's walking eastbound towards Pulaski, and the video actually captures this, you can see Officer McGilligan behind him, correct?
Yes.
And he's following on foot?
Yes.
And he also has his gun ready, correct? He has
Yes.
it unholstered,
Yes.
and he has a flashlight in the other hand.
From what I can see, yes.
Okay. And the reason why a police officer would have their gun out at that point is because they have an armed offender who is refusing to drop the knife, correct?
Yes, it's preparedness for the officer just in case things escalate.
And by escalating, you mean just in case this armed offender would turn towards that police officer and attack him?
Yes.
Now, are you aware from the review of the case that as they continued walking on 40th Street, they started to approach Pulaski, correct?
Yes.
And are you aware that my client, who was still in the squad car following, then used his squad car and turned in the southbound way, or southbound direction, I should say, on Karloff, trying to block the Juan McDonald's path?
Object to the form of the question, Your Honor. You can't testify as to what Officer Gaffney was trying to do. You could testify as to what he knows he did.
Sustained, rephrase.
Are you aware that Officer Gaffney used his vehicle when they arrived at Karloff to turn southbound to divert or to stop the Juan McDonald?
Same
Sustained,
object.
rephrase.
Let me ask you this. If Officer Gaffney at that point, when they reached Karloff, used his squad car to turn south to block the Juan McDonald from getting into a Burger King parking lot, would you agree that that's a reasonable police tactic to use at that point?
Yes.
And the reason why is because where they first encountered him, it was more of an industrial area. Would you agree?
Yes.
There
From
were
what I
no
can see in the video.
citizens there.
Yeah, from what I can see in the video, yes.
Okay, so these officers had some time to wait for backups and other police resources, correct?
Yes.
Anything about what those police officers did during that time period? Do you have any criticism of their actions?
Not at all. To be totally honest, I think they were handling the job appropriately. At the time, if they didn't feel an immediate threat of deadly force against themselves or anyone else on the scene, utilizing time, distance, and calling for additional resources was an effective way of handling the job.
And it was also a good police tactic, as you already said, to try to keep them away from a populated area, correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware that at the time that my client turned his vehicle southbound on Karloff and stopped the vehicle, that Laquan McDonald then took out his knife, or used his knife, I should rephrase that, used his knife and popped the front passenger tire of his black car?
Yeah, I'm not aware of the location exactly where it occurred, but I am aware that that did occur.
That he did pop the tire,
Yes.
disabling his black car, correct?
Yes.
And effectively, using his weapon to defeat and kind of arrest if these two were trying to make.
Yes.
Now, are you also aware, Sergeant, that after that occurred, my client, who was still in his squad car, drove a little further south in an attempt to still try to block the McDonald's path into the Burger King?
No, I wasn't aware of that, no.
Are you aware that after Laquan McDonald popped the police squad tire, that he then turned towards Officer Gaffney with the knife?
No, I was not aware of that.
Let me ask you this. If an armed offender who just disabled your squad car then approaches the squad that the police officer is in and raises the knife at that police officer, would you agree at that point that that person is an armed assailant?
Yeah, if the subject approaches the vehicle with the knife in hand and the officer reasonably believes that the attack is imminent, even if the officer is in the vehicle, or if the officer exits the vehicle, that this escalates into a combative situation and he's armed with a knife, yes.
Okay. So at the point that if someone was to raise a knife, even though the police officer's in the squad, you would still characterize that person as an armed assailant, correct?
Yeah, well, just because the officer is in the vehicle and he has protection of the vehicle doesn't mean that he can't categorize the subject as an assailant. Again, we're looking at the actions of the subject, not the subject alone. So if he's moving toward the vehicle with a knife in hand and the officer feels that an attack is imminent, even though he's behind protection, the officer can categorize the subject as an assailant.
And so if you can characterize that person as an assailant, the fact that the officer's still in the squad car, does that tell you something about whether or not he would
Reaction. Or maybe because the officer felt that he had the protection of the vehicle, he just decided not to get out and utilize a higher level of force.
Okay, and so in the scenario that I've given you, if the armed assailant raises the weapon on the passenger side of the squad car, that officer, it's reasonable for that officer to still feel fearful of an attack, correct?
Yes.
But in that split-second decision that an officer has to make, it's reasonable also that he would not use deadly force at that point because he did have some protection of the vehicle, correct?
I'm sorry, can you ask that once more?
Given the same scenario, when that police officer has that split-second decision to make that call as to whether or not to use deadly force, it's reasonable that he wouldn't have done any of that at that time because of the shielding of the squad car, correct?
Yes, the officer's actions would be reasonable based on the fact, even if it were a deadly force situation or he believed it could have been, as long as the officer believed that he had the protection of the vehicle, it's reasonable for the officer to not respond with deadly force.
Okay, but it doesn't change the subject's characterization of what he's doing, correct?
No.
And it doesn't change the fact that an officer could still feel very real fear at that point of being attacked.
And again, fear, there's nothing that states that an officer has to be fearful of anything. All the officer has to do is reasonably believe that an attack or something of that nature is imminent.
Okay, so using that language, it's reasonable for an officer to believe that he could still be attacked at that point, even though he's in the squad car.
Yes.
Now, in October of 2014, if this police officer was the victim of an aggravated assault, they had to fill out the officer battery report, correct?
Yes.
Now, let's just start with, that report obviously has some limitations that it was used back in 2014, correct?
I would say yes, like most reports.
Okay. And the report that was in use at this time in October of 2014, does it even exist anymore in the department?
No, it's been revised.
And one of the things that creates confusion for a lot of people is it's called an officer battery report, but it's not just for officers who are victims of batteries, correct?
It's the preamble of that, Your Honor, that creates confusion for a lot of people.
I could.
That's sustained, just rephrase.
Well, one of the limitations of the officer battery report is it's required to be filled out in situations where a sworn member is the victim of a murder, aggravated battery, aggravated assault, or assault while performing a police function either on duty or off duty, correct?
Yes.
So there was no form for an officer who was a victim, or strike that question. This was the form, the officer battery report, that an officer would fill out if he was a victim of an aggravated assault.
Yes.
And if an officer was a victim of an aggravated assault, to be able to fill out the officer battery report, he first had to complete a tactical response report, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
So even an officer who's a victim of an aggravated assault who did not use force had to fill out a tactical response report to be able to get to the officer battery report. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
And as you already testified, Sergeant, I believe you testified that the tactical response report, the purpose of it is to document the subject's actions and also to document what the police department members' response was to this actions, correct?
That's correct.
Judge, I believe I'm going to show Sergeant Snelling what has been marked. It's tab 12, Judge, and it's marked as Gaffney TRR, Judge, and it's marked as Gaffney TRR1.
Tab 12 for, because there's no tab 12 for
I'm sorry, I didn't realize we had different books.
Sergeant Snelling.
It's under people's trial exhibits. The initial big binder. I'm
Right,
sorry,
but
it's not
there-
under Sergeant Snelling.
Which witness is it under? Perfetti?
Yeah,
Okay, so it's under the tab for Perfetti, tab 12,
thank you, Judge.
and it's the Gaffney TRR1.
Judge, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
So, sir, I'm handing you what's been marked as Gaffney TRR1, which is under tab 12 of the state's exhibits, trial exhibits. And I ask you to just take a moment and review that. That appears to be, oh, strike that. Let me ask you this. Have you seen that report before?
No, I haven't.
But it appears to be the tactical response report of Police Officer Thomas Gaffney, correct? You can see that at the top.
Yes.
And it gives the date of the incident and the time of the incident, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And it also, under address of occurrence, it has 4000 Gap, South Karlov, Chicago, Illinois.
Yes,
Do you see that?
yes.
So the significance of that is, Sarge, is you are describing what the encounter was at that location. Is that fair to say? Or what the subject's actions were and what your response was?
I would say yes.
Now, if you go down to what the subject's actions were, which is under the section of reason for use of force, on this report, it's checked, did not follow verbal direction. You see that box checked?
Yes, I do.
So if you had a situation where Laquan McDonald was continuously told to drop the knife by Officer McElligott, would it be fair to say that you should check that box?
Yes.
Now, would it also be fair for him to check the assailant boxes if, in fact, the evidence showed that Laquan McDonald raised the knife at Officer Gaffney while he was in the squad car?
Well, Your Honor, I object. This is beyond the scope of what this witness testified to. He has not examined what happened with regard to the car, Ms. Gaffney's car, that was expressly said during his correct. He has not examined Officer Gaffney's grand jury testimony. He has not examined Officer McElligott's description, and he has not evaluated the situation in preparation for this testimony.
Mr. Fahey?
Judge, the sergeant has already testified that under the hypothetical law, the individual raising a knife outside of the squad car on the passenger side and facing a police officer, that characterization is an assailant. So I'm simply asking him if that was the situation, is it appropriate that he check the assailant boxes?
Two different questions, Your Honor. One was a hypothetical under a variety of facts, some of which are inconsistent with the evidence in this case. Now he's asking him, how should Officer Gaffney have filled out this report? Two totally different questions.
It did sound to me like there were two different questions. What question do you want to ask, Mr. Fahey?
Judge, I'll withdraw. I'll start again.
Okay, so your objection is noted, it's sustained.
Now, if Officer Gaffney encountered an armed assailant out on the street, it would be appropriate for him to check the boxes under assailant. Would you agree?
Yes.
Okay, and a knife obviously is a deadly weapon, correct?
Can be used as a deadly weapon, yes.
Okay, and it can certainly be used to cause death or great bodily harm.
Yes.
And it certainly can be used as a weapon that would, create an imminent threat of battery. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And if he swung the knife in the officer's direction and hit the windshield, it's fair to say that an officer would feel that that was an attack. Do you agree with that?
I object, right now we're back to where he has not evaluated the situation with Officer Gaff. He expressly said that after that. It's beyond the scope of his testimony.
Mr. Fahey,
Judge Howell.
just rephrase. That's sustained rephrase.
Sergeant, objectively, if the hypothetical that I presented to you, under that hypothetical, is it reasonable to check all of those assailant boxes?
I object. I don't know which hypothetical.
Mr. Fahey, if you could just back up to exactly which portion you're asking about.
Sergeant, under the hypothetical, an armed assailant raises the knife at a police officer who's still in the squad. You've already testified it's reasonable to categorize that person as assailant, correct?
Yes.
And so it would be reasonable if that officer had to do a technical response report to check the assailant boxes, correct?
Yes, if the officer describes him as an assailant, yes.
There's also a portion that shows the member's response in that report, correct?
Yes.
Now, if an officer didn't use any force, obviously you wouldn't check any of those options, correct?
That's correct.
But he does have checked on their member presence, correct?
Yes. Yes.
That basically indicates that he was there. Is that a yes, sir?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Sir, I'm now going to approach and show you what's been not marked. And again, Judge, this is under the state's trial exhibits. It's tab 15, and it's Gaffney OBR 1.
Is that under
It's
Perfetti?
yes.
It is. It's under Perfetti. Okay, thank you.
Sir, let me ask if you could just take a moment and review what I've handed you. Not to sound repetitive, but what I've handed you is the officer battery report for Officer Thomas Gaffney, correct?
Yes.
And obviously, it's already been established with the form. At the top of the form, it indicates when that report should be put out, correct?
Yes, it does.
And if you follow down, it just asks for the information of the officer, type of assignment, things like that.
Yes.
And if you look towards the bottom on the left-hand column, there's a section of the type of injury to the office, correct?
Yes.
And clearly this officer checked off that he was not in his account.
Yes.
Now, if you go back up to the top on the right-hand column, Again, it has the address of occurrence as 4001 half South Harlem. So that's a different location from where the shooting occurred, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Now, the section where it says number of officers battered. I'm going to ask you some questions about that, Sergeant. On this form, if the officers were assaulted, would you still answer that question?
Yes, you would answer the question because it would note the number of officers attacked, whether it was physical or an assault.
Okay, so even though it says number of officers battered, it does include number of officers assaulted. Would you agree with that?
If that's the only option available, yes, it would include.
Sergeant, are you aware that in the clear system, when an officer is actually preparing this report, when he gets to this section of number of officers battered in the clear system, the question appears as number of officers assaulted. Are you aware of that?
Objection. If we're talking about 2014, he's got to be clear about when he's talking.
That's sustained.
Back
He just rephrase it.
Thank you, Judge. Back in 2014, when this form was prepared, this portion of the report that refers to number of officers battered, were you aware that in the clear system, the way the question asks, the way the question is stated is number of officers assaulted or battered?
In the clear system, I'm having a hard time recalling, but I believe so.
But you would agree that it includes assaults?
Yes.
Now, on this report that you have before you, the answer is 3, correct?
Yes.
Now, obviously, that number would include the officer who was actually assaulted who's preparing the report, correct?
I'm sorry, can you?
Well, if the officer who's preparing the report was one of the officers that were assaulted, obviously he would be included in their answer, correct?
Yes.
Now, if there were other officers that were assaulted during the incident, would you also include them in that answer?
Object to forming the question as what during the incident is, Your Honor.
Mr. Dyke, could you be sustained, be a little bit more specific?
If there were other officers that were assaulted during the incident, would those be included in there?
That was the same question. Rephrase.
Let me ask you this way, Sergeant. Are you aware that Officer Walsh and Officer Dyke also prepared similar reports?
I'm aware of it. Yes.
So when you see that number 3, what does that tell you? What does that mean to you?
Objection, Your Honor. First of all, it's outside the scope of his expertise as to what the number means and second, there's no penalty.
Sustained.
Let me ask you this. If Officer included in that response 2 other police officers on the last year, do you think he should have done that?
Objection, Your Honor. The incomplete hypothetical. The essence is if Gaffney see it, and then I think Sergeant Stone could answer the hypothetical.
I'll rephrase.
Okay.
If Officer Gaffney did not see any other police officer being assaulted or battered, should he have included that in the report?
Well, there's a couple of things here. One, if you didn't see it, the answer to the question is no, you shouldn't have. added them to his report. Secondly, these events occurred at 2 separate locations. So because Officer Gaffney's incident occurred at a separate location from the other event that occurred later, they should have been done separately.
Okay, so your position is you shouldn't have included those on that report.
No.
And if you were the supervisor of this report, you would have had it corrected. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would have rejected it and made corrections. Obviously, the supervisor's job is to check it for accuracy and completeness.
And the reports that were prepared, in this case, the TRR, the Officer Battery Report, those were reviewed by supervisors, correct?
I would imagine so, yes.
And the general orders and special orders with regards to use of force, they do designate supervisors certain responsibilities with regards to these reports. Do you agree?
Yes.
And you've already mentioned one, the sergeant needs to review the TRR and the OBR and check it for completeness and accuracy.
That's correct.
So in this situation, it's your position that the sergeant should have corrected that.
Yes.
In addition to the sergeant, and there's also another level of review after the sergeant in this situation, correct?
That's correct.
And there's a term that's used by the department called OCIC. Can you tell us what that is?
That's the incident commander who arrives on scene, and it's the street deputy. And the final decision on the tactical response report lies with him or her.
So the first line of review would be the police officer's sergeant.
Yes.
And you've already said, if you were the sergeant of this, you would have corrected that and sent it back to the officer, correct?
That's correct.
And after the sergeant reviews those reports, it then goes to the LCIC.
No, it goes to the lieutenant.
Lieutenant? Does the lieutenant also review those reports?
The lieutenant reviews the reports. The lieutenant also has the opportunity to recheck it or completely delete it from the system if he or she believes that it was done in error. And then once the lieutenant approves, then the final product goes to the OCIC.
And when we use the term OCIC, can you give us an idea of what kind of rank that is?
It's a deputy chief.
Deputy chief.
Deputy chief.
So there's actually 3 levels of review in the department for these types of reports.
Yes.
Your Honor, may I have a moment?
Yes, take your time.
Judge, I have no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Who is going to go next?
I was judge.
Mr. Green.
Good afternoon, sir. How are you, sir? Good, sir. Thank you. Do they have an obligation to their wife and children to come home after duty?
Officers have a responsibility to protect their lives so that they can make it home to their families.
And if in a split decision, an officer makes the wrong decision, he can lose his life, correct?
Yes, depending on the circumstances, absolutely.
When you look at the video, sir, and when you've spoken to the prosecutors regarding this case, you have emphasized, I believe, If I'm using the wrong word, you can just tell me. But I believe you have indicated that you've been looking at this case in hindsight, correct?
Well, everything that happens that you review is in hindsight, so the answer is yes.
And you've looked at the video multiple times, correct?
Yes.
I believe you've even looked at it frame by frame, do you not?
Yes.
And other than the video, you listened to the radio calls of October 20th, 2014, correct?
Yes.
Were you ever, strike that. Do you mind, can we play this video again, please? And if I ask to stop it, and if I'm quick enough, maybe we could do that.
Just for the record, Your Honor, this is People's Exhibit 813R-10.
Thank you, Mr. Paper.
This is the only video I believe we've seen. Can you stop it, sir? The subject is running at these police cars, is he not?
He's running in that direction, yes.
Okay. You watched this frame by frame, correct?
Yes.
At a point shortly thereafter, you see him pull a knife out like this, and I'm indicating for the record my right hand with the, well, mine has a pen in it, but there was a knife in his right hand that he showed. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Would you continue on? Stop, please. Right there, sir, he is flashing the knife, correct?
That's correct.
Could you continue on? Now he has the knife in his right hand, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you. That's good. This dash cam shows the back of the man who's been identified as LaQuan McDonald. I'll call him Mr. McDonald. Is that right? It does not show the front of him, correct?
Right there, no, it does not.
Continue on, please. Did it at any time show the front of his body?
I'm sorry, what?
At any time during this video, did we see the front of his body?
When he spun.
Before he spun, did we see the front of his body before he was shot?
No.
Okay. Could you back up again, please? Stop. What is he doing? Is he not taking that knife that is in his right hand, and is he not turning towards the officers with that knife in his hand?
I can't see that in the video.
Okay. So that's kind of the dark side of the moon. We're not able to see what's going on that side. Right?
That's correct.
But the two officers that got out of the squad car, they would be able to see what I referred to as the dark side of the moon, correct?
If you're asking if they would have a better perspective than someone watching the video, obviously on scene is always a greater perspective than watching video.
Okay. The video has some, I mean, if you're trying to actually figure out exactly what occurred and exactly what LaQuan McDonald did, the video has some disabilities, doesn't it?
Yes.
And the better perspective would be the vision and sight of the two officers that got out of that squad car, right?
That's correct.
Now, you've already indicated, Sergeant, that at some point in time prior to this, Mr. McDonald was an armed assailant, correct?
At some point, based on the information, yes.
Okay. So a person can become an armed assailant based on the fact that he's armed and some action or even something he might say, correct?
Yes.
All right. And then he can turn into what, an active resistor, correct?
Yes, the actions can change in a split second.
And then he can change into a armed assailant again in a split second, correct?
That's correct, yes.
You mentioned something about objective facts. What do you mean by that, sir?
Well, based on the totality of circumstances, an officer makes a decision that is objectively reasonable based on the information. And that's under Graham v. Connor, that the officer takes everything in this totality and applies the objective reasonableness standard. And the officer is to be judged by that objectively reasonable standard.
But when we're talking about objective, that's how he's supposed to be judged, objectively, correct?
Yes.
By the objective. But what goes on between our ears is not always objective, is it?
Well, that depends on how it's applied when we're talking about police work.
Well, you could have a subjective opinion as to what is happening, can't you?
You can, but when officers are applying it, even though it may appear to be subjective to someone else, if it's objectively reasonable, then it's reasonable under the totality of circumstances.
And that's the standard by which you may judge your fellow police officer.
Yes.
Okay. But what is going on between the officer's ears and what he thinks is happening, that is subjective, correct?
Well, it can be subjective, but if the officer is making a split-second decision, and in that split-second decision, it's not exactly what he believes it is, but he has reason to believe that that is what it is, then it would be objectively reasonable.
Okay. Did you review, other than the videotape or the videotape or the radio call, did you review the 2 hours of testimony that Joseph Walsh gave to a federal grand jury?
No.
Would hearing 2 hours of questions and answers from one of the participants in this, would that help you to determine what was going on in their minds?
Well, yes, a video isn't going to tell me what the officers were thinking at the time or why they responded the way that they did.
I mean, I appreciate the fact that you've given an opinion, Sergeant, because this is what you were asked to do, but wouldn't you want, as a veteran police officer, to know all the facts before you give an opinion?
Well, my opinion was simply given based on, and I believe that it was stated that my opinion is given based on a video without any other information.
Oh, I know you were very straight up about that, and I appreciate that.
So the opinion is simply based on what I see in the video. Now, obviously, more information could change things.
I believe you've also said, sir, that there is a very fine line between an active resistor and an assailant, correct?
Yes.
That fine line, when is it drawn? Is it drawn only in hindsight? I mean, how do you do it if you're there? You know, you want to go home that night. Where's that fine line about active resistor and assailant? Who draws that line?
So, Judge, there were about 6 different questions.
I apologize, Mr. Safer. Let me ask you,
Let me just rule that objection sustained. Ask one question at a time.
how do you draw the fine line, Sergeant?
Well, that would be based on the officer's decision. So when the officer is on scene, based on what that officer reasonably believes he's encountering, the officer can or should respond in that situation. And the officer needs to be able to articulate why he responded in the manner that he did.
And when the officer should be able to articulate why he did what it was
Thank
he
you.
did, that articulation could be presented in 2 hours of grand jury testimony, correct?
Yes.
You don't know what's going on in the mind of either of these officers, whether it be Van Dyke or Walsh, correct?
Yeah, I don't believe anyone except those officers knew what was going on in their minds.
Would audio have helped you at all in analyzing whether or not this fellow, Mr. McDonald, was a active resistor or a armed assailant?
Well, the audio alone wouldn't be enough. It would have to be things that are said. But the video is still limited. It's still the video.
The video is limited. Okay. I mean, from your experience, the air would be filled with sirens, correct, at this scene?
Possibly, yes.
Okay. And the officers would be screaming, "Drop the knife," would they not?
I would imagine, yes.
I want to get into these reports for a moment, Sergeant, if you don't mind. This, for instance, this document here, which is PRR, CBD, PRR1 equals exhibit. This is not actually the form that is filled out by the reporting officer.
Are you speaking of that?
Well, I don't mean this big $100,000 check that you want at the golf outing. No. But in real size, that is not exactly the form that they fill out, correct? You know what, let me ask it a different way, because we got to get into it anyways. Would you tell me about this CLEAR system? What is the CLEAR system?
Well, the CLEAR system is our intranet where we access reporting, court notifications, things of that nature. So anything that that is automated, we access through the CLEAR system.
Okay. So if an officer wants to fill out a TRR, he goes into that system, does he?
Yes.
Okay. And then on the screen, that form does not show up, does it?
Excuse me,
That form, the TRR form, as you see it right there, that does not show up on the screen that the officer has to fill out.
well, it's automated.
Well, by automated, and I'm going to use a technical word I just learned, you fill out a form and then that information is populated to this type of report, correct?
Well, yeah, that would be correct.
Okay. So if you look at any CLEAR reports, you see that Joseph Walsh reported being assaulted? Have you, sir?
I'm sorry, I didn't know that was a question, I'm sorry.
Have you looked at any clear reports that Joe Walsh filled out where he said he had been assaulted?
No, I haven't.
If an officer is assaulted, he is to fill out an officer battery report, correct?
That's correct.
Right. I'm sure you didn't create this system, but the only way you can fill out an OBR is by first filling out a TRR, correct?
That's correct.
So if you want to report that you have been assaulted, then you have to go to the TRR report.
That's correct.
Fill that out and then go to the OBR, right?
Yes.
Now, what I'd like to do is, do you have any of the TR in the binder you have right there? Do you have any of Joe Walsh's TRRs?
No, I don't.
Did you publish Walsh's TRR?
TR1. And for the record, it's under tab 11.
Is that under Betty?
Confetti.
Okay, sir. Thank you. Okay. We'll stop at, we'll start at the top, sir. This purports to be a TRR filed by Joseph Walsh, okay? And the date is October 20, 2014. Time is 21:57. Address of occurrence is 4112 South Pulaski. Location, beat, position 9161. What does that mean? You know?
That's the officer. It's a code for police officer.
And this says Walsh Joseph, star number, male, white, age, height, weight, date of appointment, employee number, unit, PCAR, duty status, member, other things that he would have, he certainly would know by heart, would he not?
Yes.
Okay. Then on the TRR, you have the name LeBron McDonald as the subject, correct?
Yes.
Where would Joseph Walsh get the name of LeBron McDonald based on your experience?
Well, they would have identified the subject, and
When you say they, who
the officers, all the officers on scene
okay.
should have been able to identify the subject at some point.
And date of birth of LeBron McDonald. Now, he wouldn't know that. He would, where would he get that information?
Well, being police officers, if you run his name or any information that's provided, you can gather that information.
So there's a sharing of information so that this report can be filled out.
Well,
Is there not?
objection around foundation.
That's sustained, just ask a preliminary question.
How would an officer know the date of birth of a subject, such as LeBron McDonald?
Well, there's several ways that an officer could have gotten that. Again, running his name or getting the information from other officers or other reports.
Okay. And his height of 6'1", 185 pounds. Certainly the officer on the scene is not measuring and weighing the subject, is he?
No, not necessarily.
Where would they get that information?
Well, same place.
From other officers?
Could be other officers. It could be, just information from the system from running his name.
Certainly, Joseph Walsh on the scene wouldn't know what doctor saw him at the hospital. Where would he get this information?
Other reports or other officers.
Okay. Condition hospitalized. Again, information from other people, correct?
Yes.
It says, as a passive resistor, he did not follow verbal direction, correct?
Yes.
He has himself being an assault victim with an imminent threat of a battery, correct?
Correct.
Attack with a weapon, and that was a knife, correct?
That's correct.
And uses force likely to cause death or great bodily harm. Now, he is not the one who did that, but he has checked that box, correct?
Correct.
Is that an error in correcting that box?
I'm sorry, what do you mean?
Is that an error in checking that box that he was not the one who shot?
Not necessarily. It would depend. Is he checking that box because of his own actions, meaning that he reasonably believed that this was occurring toward him? If Officer Walsh is filling this out for his partner, it becomes more of an issue. But if Officer Walsh is saying that he felt this threat level, then it wouldn't be inappropriate to check that box.
This is all shown to supervisors, correct?
Yes.
And they, I think, sign off on it eventually?
Yes.
Additional information, offender was armed with a knife. We go down a little. Thanks. Let's see, we had a reviewing supervisor, Stephen Franco on this case, right? So on this form. Is that right?
Yes.
So, to fill out these, to get to the OBR, you have to fill this form out. But this form has information on it where the patrol officer might not have readily available to him, and information is shared among police officers, correct?
Yes.
Right. Could we go to his OBR? Do you mind?
The record is under tab 14. Or this Walsh OBR one.
Tab 14 under Confetti.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I can take a quick break for something in full housekeeping matter.
Okay.
One second.
Court's in a very short recess.